All right, everyone. I'm excited for today's conversation with Dr. Sasha Heinz. She is amazing. When they sent me her profile of like, do you want to have this person on your podcast? I was like, yes. She's a developmental psychologist and a mindset coach who's an expert in positive psychology, lasting behavioral change, and the science of getting unstuck. I don't feel like there's probably anybody listening to this podcast that's like, I don't feel like I'm stuck in this area of my life. When I'm like unstuck, I'm like, I feel super stuck in like a few different areas of my life. So like really excited to talk to you and to have you on the podcast. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on.
Oh yeah, same Liz. I'm so excited to have this conversation. It's my favorite thing to do is to
Yay.
talk about this stuff.
Good, good. Because we're going to dive into it. So for everyone listening, tell us, how did you get into this work? And like what took you to really focus on kind of like that behavioral development side of it, and like helping people make changes in their life.
Yeah, you know, I've said this so many times. So if anyone else has heard me say this before, forgive me. But it starts with me search. I think I have a human brain, and I struggled. I was diagnosed with ADHD as a child in my early teen years. So I struggled a lot with, oof, self-regulation, impulsivity, not in any way being able to close what we call the intention action gap. I have all these good intentions and I can't actually follow through on them, which makes you miserable. Um, and in my own family, there was a lot of addiction and those struggles going on as well. So, I mean, this is like the constellation of typical things that go on when you have things like ADHD and addiction and all of that. So anyway, I didn't ever really want to be a psychologist or go into the field of psychology. That was never my sort of childhood dream. And then I hit my early 20s and realized that I'd sort of sucked at humaning. I was just not good at this thing called life. I didn't know how to do it. And was really flailing around. And I had been an athlete most of my life. And so in these, what was like the early aughts, and life coaching was brand new, really brand new. But this concept of, and I worked with a therapist as well, who was wonderful. I mean, I've worked with many brilliant therapists who I think have just changed the game for me. But working with a coach to me was something totally different. It wasn't about unpacking and untangling kind of what had happened and how I became who I am. It was more about, are you able to live a good day today? What are you doing today? And one of the things that I will say is there's this wonderful, mysterious thing that happens that as you start, living in integrity. What do I mean by that? Where you're following through on what you say you're going to do, right? You're integrated internally. As you start to sort of have a good day and string a few good days together, and then months and so on, like, you sort of are getting healing or, whatever. In my case, it was just sort of like doing better. And I, I had such a different perspective about my past. I had a different perspective about the things that, I would sit in therapy trying to unpack and unravel and understand. But the more my life got unstuck, and got better, I had a more generous perspective about my past. Isn't that interesting?
Mhm.
I made different meaning about what had happened in my life. It didn't seem so maybe dire or grave. All of a sudden, the narrative is like, well, these hard things happened and I've had to go, process them and work through them and all of these things. And I see how they impacted me. And also it's also made me who I am today. And I like this person. So part of the package of who I am today is, internalizing all of it. And so, I felt this like, oh my gosh, actually, isn't this ironic? The way to sort of heal your past is to focus on now and living a good day now. And the more I can step into a future where I like who I am and I like how I'm showing up and that feels good to me, my past gets healed kind of as a byproduct. And so, I worked with a coach in the early aughts, and it was just life-changing for me. It was like I wasn't over analyzing so much as really focusing on getting more stability in my current life, which then of course gave me that sort of stronger foundation to be able to open the door to things that had happened and really understand myself and all of that from a much from terra firma.
Yeah, that's so interesting because well, first of all, when you're saying like following through with things, like having certain intentions, I feel like I resonate with that so much because I have like goals and whatever, and it's just like feels impossible for me to ever get them done.
Mhm.
And I feel like so many people listening can just also resonate with that because we all are trying to like do our best now, but also kind of heal parts of us that have happened. I think a lot of people listening in the season of motherhood, so much of what's happened in your past comes up to light, and you
Totally.
can either heal it and try to do better for your kids or bury it and it'll come out in other ways. And but focusing on the today is such a different perspective versus like really trying to maybe necessarily like deep dive. It's like, okay, how can I show up today? And I just love how you kind of focused on that for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have this conception, maybe, it's sort of a conceptual framework, but this idea that we do this deep dive into our past and heal these wounds. But this idea that we're healing the past wounds in the past is not real. That's not what's happening. We're healing it in real time. And how do
Mm-hmm.
we do that is by making one choice, doing one small thing differently, counting to 5 before we have an outburst with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
It's in those tiny little moments that we're actually doing the work of the patching and the healing and, the pivot toward a new direction. And I think that this is one of the things that maybe for some people that are a little apprehensive about psychotherapy, I think that the self-awareness, the self-inquiry that goes that is a part of working with a very skillful therapist is so important. And I think that there's apprehension, perhaps like, I just can't open that box. Like I can't go back into all of that stuff. And it's like, but the reality is that really what we're healing is right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for me with coaching, I always wanted to be a coach, even though, I have my doctorate in psychology. I'm not a clinical psychologist, developmental psychologist, but I always wanted to be a coach because there was something about that modality and that relationship um, that sort of emphasized that like presence in the here and now. And what are you doing today? And what are you doing tomorrow? And how are, this is you're want to move toward this destination. How are we getting there? Like really practical. Um, and then all of that other stuff that like the wounds, and they're real. And do they come up when we're parenting? Yes. Oh my goodness, yes. Like big time. But it's so much easier to address them, to make peace with them when you're feeling that are moving in a new direction in your own current life. That's just the way it works.
Mm-hmm.
So I think people get worried about getting mired in your past. And it's like, no, really the real work is always right now. It's the next decision. It's the next step. It's the next small thing you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I feel like while you were saying that, like so much was coming to mind because I've been like trying to work through some things in my past just to, I guess, like we were saying, like in motherhood, like different things come up that maybe you didn't know were there. And then being like, okay, why am I feeling this way? Like, where is it coming from? But like you saying, like, maybe I can't heal my 13-year-old self. I can heal myself today to where like what happened no longer is coming out, which is like so good because I feel like I've focused on like, okay, how do I like almost go back and make amends with
Mm-hmm.
these things that have happened in the past. And it's crazy because I've never had like something crazy traumatic happen, but like there's just so much that comes up in motherhood where like maybe there were times like you didn't feel safe or you didn't feel loved, or you were like, how come nobody said something to me about this? How come nobody noticed I was going through this? How come, like all these different things. And instead of like me being like, okay, like how do I fix the teenage me? Be like, okay, like how do I basically almost kind of like make amends, like not have it come out now. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it's like stepping into and I can't for the life of me remember who wrote it, so forgive me. We'll find it and put it in the show notes, but there's a wonderful book called it's From Maiden to Mother. Um and it really talks about the sort of evolution of stepping into this more, becoming becoming the parent, becoming the mother, and leaving the maiden, behind, and being the mother. And this is all internal stuff happening internally, right? I mean, this is metaphorical transition, but transitioning into a mother who can take care of that maiden inside, who is still afraid, who's still feeling insecure, who still needs nurturing, right? But that we are doing the work as adults to step into being that mother, not just for our own children, but for ourselves. And, but the work is always in the here and now. And, which I think is always so hopeful, because there's always another chance. There's always you have a new moment right now to do something differently. You have a new opportunity right now to repair. You have a new opportunity right now to respond to something differently than you did an hour ago. And to me, that's just enormously, hopeful, because for me, at least, I would say that becoming a parent, and I have at the moment an 11 and an 8-year-old, almost a 12 and a 9-year-old, um, becoming a parent has made me so much more compassionate for my own parents, not in a dismissive way of like, oh, they were doing their best, whatever. No, but just recognizing, yeah, some of it was very imperfect and didn't maybe feel great. And you see them as human beings and not as these sort of giants on a, pedestal, but as real human beings that were wrestling with their own things and working through their own stuff and doing the best they could, which is true. And then having compassion for them and recognizing it's like, okay, I can have a little bit of compassion for myself when I'm not showing up in the way that I would love to, or have a moment where I think, oh gosh, that was not my best self, let's try that again. But, there's so much to me. I think people feel so much despair around, things have happened, and there is so much maybe shame and regret, and there's nothing that can be done. It's in the past, it's over. But it's like the past doesn't exist anymore. It only exists in our head, in our
Mhm.
nervous system, right? And we can do work to actually heal that. So, what really exists is right now, and the decision of like, what do I want to do right now? What's the choice I want to make right now? And to me, this is just ultimate hope. Otherwise, I'm carrying around like, Jacob Marley with my 50 ton 50 tons of chains that I can't let go of.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting how you talk about the self-help industry, because it's something that was a big part of my life for a long time. And I read, every single book out there. And I did get a lot out of it of, okay, like, oh, I didn't notice this was in my life, and working through it. However, like even going through the becoming a certified life coach program, stuff like that. So like when you're there because we would like meet every so often on weekends, and then you'd have to like do work on your own basically. And then of
Mhm.
course, like when you're there, it's like this high, right? And when you're going through it, it's like this high. And even when you're reading like this self-help book, you're like, yes, yes. But
Mhm.
then the book's over now. and and it's like, okay, how am I supposed to like actually change? Or I'm implementing these changes And then everything goes back to normal. I'm like, oh, I'm
Right.
like acting out of like a higher self. I'm responding better. And then it's just like, oh, I'm back to just like being triggered. I'm back to, feeling shamed, feeling whatever, angry in
Yeah.
these situations, whereas before I had like such a better grip on it. So there's like all this great tools and resources out there and we're absorbing them, but then it's like, how do you actually apply it? Like, like Tony Robbins, right? He has like these huge like weekends and people are on fire. And I remembered like after my like life coaching program, I kept getting, because the internet like listens to us. So like I kept getting like ads for like these programs and these programs. And I'm like, these programs, like, yes, you're on a high for a weekend, but then you're like left into the world. And it's like there's so much you can take with you, but you kind of end up getting back into that place. At least like that's been true of me and a lot of people that I know, where it's like, I know the information, I know how I should respond. I don't like the word should, but you get what I'm saying.
Could. You
Yeah,
could respond.
how I
Yeah.
could respond. I know that I've done so much work. Why am
Mhm.
I not seeing it lived out in my everyday?
Yeah, I know. It's such a drag. It's because we're not robots and we're humans. It's such a bummer. We go to these, a seminar, conference, a program, read a book, listen to a podcast, and we are inspired and we are feeling all of these awesome feelings. Like we get flooded with these awesome biochemical cocktail that feels so good. And nothing's wrong with that. That can jumpstart someone. I mean, there's plenty of anecdotal stories that people would say, oh, that experience changed my life. And that, the veil dropped and I really started to do things differently. Okay. But then we have, our dopaminergic system, like it's always the pleasure pain balance is in the same part of the brain. So we're always recalibrating. So like we get really, really high and then we're going to have a little bit of a hangover. It's inevitable. And by the way, this is going to happen if you're playing video games and you stop playing video games, you're going to feel it. You have someone visiting for the weekend. It's so much fun, flooded with all that amazing like feeling. And then they leave. You know that feeling? It's like despair. You feel bereft. Like everything feels like there's like this void. A friend leaves town and you're like, oh gosh. And then for a few hours, you feel crummy. Okay, but then you recalibrate and you go back to feeling normal again. So this is like part of the just normal human biology, the way we work. Um, but I think when we get stuck in this, I call it the hope, willpower, shame cycle. You have all this hope and you're like, yes, I'm going to read this book and I'm feeling so excited and so motivated and so inspired. And then you try to muscle it. Like I'm going to willpower and be more disciplined and do all the things that either the motivational speaker said to do, or this author said to do, or whatever. And then we don't, because we're human and we don't follow through on it. We blow it off. We have all those notes from the conference we never read.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
They're
I
just
have
sitting
journals
there.
and journals full of stuff.
Yes, they're sitting there shaming us, right? And then we don't go back, we don't review, we don't do the exercises they told us to do, la la la, all that stuff, right? Everybody can relate to this. And then we feel shame. Like we feel terrible. And then we want to, and shame is a hiding emotion. We just want to like crawl under the duvet or under your desk or whatever. And then what do we do to try to relieve the shame? We go through that cycle all over again. We're like, I'm going to set another goal. I'm going to read another book. I'm going to, because then that's going to amp up the hope again. And then we fall into the same pattern over and over again. So it's like a cycle that ultimately leads, in my mind, it's like Groundhog's Day, despair, doesn't feel very good. I think the real work of change is understanding what are the assumptions. I mean, it is deep work of self-inquiry of understanding what are the assumptions that the big assumptions that I have about the way that I see the world. Are they accurate? Are they inaccurate? How is it holding me back? And actually, in small, modest ways, experimenting with, testing out, are these assumptions true? The hypotheses that I hold about the way the world works, or the way I am, or who I am, is it actually true? I was coaching someone last week who was saying, it was a mom. It was so cute because in the coaching session, like her daughter was running around. I could see, right? She's so frazzled. Just like, I can't even find a minute to myself, right? That this is what's going on. I can see it over Zoom. And she was saying to me, I'm so at my wit's end. I just can't maintain a routine. I can't keep a routine. And when we were exploring it and then looking at it, like, is that actually true? And looking at what is that thought, that belief system, I can't keep a routine, what is that creating for her? Right. And when we work through it, like that belief system of I can't keep a routine, it's impossible, led to creates an emotion. Our thoughts create an emotion. The belief system creates an emotion. The emotion for her was, it was like a shame. She felt, badly about it, but badly about herself. And then of course, with, shame, she was like shutting down. So, or like, anyway, so then she would shut down, and the action she was taking was she would like give up, throw in the towel, and then the result that she would create from those actions, or inaction in this case, was not maintaining a routine.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you can see this confirmation bias with the thought and the result. It's just like same loop over and over again. And when it came down to it, I was like, hold on a second. You have this belief system, you can't keep a routine. I was like, do you brush your teeth every day? And, she's like, of course. It's like, nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
You 100% keep a routine. And why does this tiny little shift matter? Because when she's stuck in this belief, I can't keep a routine, she's never going to develop what's happening in her actual life. She has little kids. Her life has been completely hit by a Mack truck.
Mm-hmm.
Every routine that she had prior to being a mother is shattered because her whole orientation of her life, it's like life turned on its axis. We've got dependents that need you, that have different times where they need to go do things, and all of the routines that for some of us that maybe have a harder time establishing routines, it takes a little more energy for us to do it. I would be one of those people, right? That can feel totally chaotic. And so she was slipping into this belief system of like, I just can't do it. I've lost the ability to create a routine. Everything's a chaotic mess. Okay. But that belief system was really holding her back from making any incremental change at all, because what she would do is she would get frustrated and then she would feel shame. Like she would just shut down. So then, with our work was, well, let's make a list of all the ways in which you do actually have very solid routines. And there were lots.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't seem like a big routine. It's like, do you drink coffee every morning? Yes, I do. Great. Goes in the routine list, right? You do that automatically. Do you get dressed in the morning? Yes. Excellent. Right? Like that goes in the routine. You do it automatically without thinking. That's exactly what a routine is. You tie your shoes, routine. You probably pull out of the driveway exactly the same way every day, routine. So then running this, like even that was its own little experiment that is testing, is this assumption that I'm holding true? Is it accurate? And this is actually, if like, what I think people get wrong about the science of behavioral change, of what it actually takes to make lasting change, is that, mindset, all behavioral change is an expression of a mindset change. And we're not going to make lasting change if we're not investigating, dismantling and debunking belief systems that are outdated, and largely inaccurate. They have our beliefs haven't evolved as we've evolved. And that's really what our job is. If we're in the business of wanting to make changes in our life, it is about exploring those belief systems and doing the actual applied work of deliberately experimenting with them and testing them out. Is this actually true?
Mm-hmm.
Is it always true?
Mm-hmm. I love that you like highlighted though on the good things. Like because everything you're saying about this lady, I feel like is true of myself too right now, the season of life I'm in with like a
Mhm.
2-year-old and a
Oh, yeah.
7-month-old.
Oh my gosh.
And
Yes, of
it's
course.
like just complete chaos. And feels like it's so hard to like get certain things done. But I mean, we do create time for these small rituals, right? Like get up in the morning, make my bed, get dressed, like go make coffee. There are definitely little things in there. So like knowing, oh, I do have routine. Okay. Like how can I add, change, whatever. And then also like creating those underneath beliefs, like breaking and dismantling those, I think is so important. And I recently had the opportunity, I was talking to my sisters, and like growing up, I was always the messy one. Um, but they'll still say that of me, and it's not true anymore. And so I got pissed at them. Like we were talking,
Mhm.
and I was like, you guys, like, I am not messy. Like I can be disorganized, yes, but I'm not messy. And I don't like being told that because that's something that I've believed of myself. Like, well, I'm just a mess. I'm just a mess. Like that's that core
Totally.
belief with
Yep.
me is like, oh, well, Liz, she's just a hot mess, you know, like, and that's like not really true anymore. And when I was a kid,
Right.
absolutely. My mom would send me to clean my room and I would be in there for 2 hours and she's like, "What's Liz doing?" And I'm just like in the corner playing with this beautiful rock that I found in my room, still a
Okay.
complete
Okay.
disaster.
But hold on a second. First of all, I'm sitting here. I'm like, I want to coach you on the podcast, but like, we're going to dive into this. But this is, I want you, I mean, everyone listening to this podcast, can you guys hear what's going on in Elizabeth's brain? Liz is making assumptions about things that happened when she was a child, but she's approaching it from from a child's mind, from
Mhm.
what her brain was giving her and feeding her when she was 9,
Mhm.
which is I'm a mess, as opposed to, no, there's probably a much more sophisticated answer to that. Like, for example, maybe you're a neurodivergent. Maybe you have ADHD. Maybe you are someone who like deeply gets into flow and you had hobbies and things that you would just lose time in, and cleaning your room was not the priority. Playing with toys or whatever the thing the creative thing you were doing was the priority. It had
Mhm.
nothing to do with like you got the mess gene,
Right, right.
right? But like think about how we talk in this manner, and it's so unsophisticated, and then we believe these unsophisticated myopic black and white beliefs for the rest of our life. I mean, your belief system is your BS, right? Like it
Mhm.
is. It's like your job as an adult is to, and this is what we say in Mind Your Mind, right? It's like your job is to grab your BS by the horns,
Mhm.
because so
Mhm.
much of this stuff we've just lugged it all along. It's like I'm a mess. It's like you were a 9-year-old who preferred playing over cleaning up your room. That's pretty typical. Like,
Right.
right? There's nothing bizarre about that. Excuse me. Like, there's nothing weird about that. And the explanation for that certainly isn't, well, she's just a mess.
Mhm.
She's just a disaster. She's just a hot mess. That's
Mhm.
not the answer. No,
Right. Mhm. Right.
there's no nuance.
Right. I think it is hard like when you're just like told that your whole life though, like even, just whatever. And it is true. Like then I am coming from it from a mindset of, you know, 25, 30 years ago. And that's where like you're saying, like finding these core beliefs is so important because like I know that that's something that comes up for me and I haven't like quite worked through it totally, but like I'm aware that it's there. Like I'm aware that like I've believed this for so long of myself. Like, oh, yep, coffee on the shirt, this is over there, blah, blah, blah. I'm just a hot mess. That's Liz.
Right.
So
And
it's
by the
like,
way, there may be an aspect where you're like, yes, do I have a tendency to be clumsy? Sure. But then we globalize it,
right.
right? I, I am, I mean, my husband will say, for someone who is an athlete, he will say to me all the time, he's like, for such a good athlete, I've never met anyone more clumsy than you. You will bump into any inanimate object in the room. You will, like a heat-seeking missile, you will bump into it. Cause I'm in my own head. I'm like,
Hmm.
I'm a little bit like an absent-minded professor. I get lost in my own thoughts and I'm not paying attention. But when I am paying attention, I'm not a klutz.
Right.
right? Like, it's not, I'm just a klutz, or like, I'm just messy. Like, that's a global thing. It's no, there's a specific thing going on here. And when we are engaging with it without these kind of what we call big assumptions, then we're in reality. And also we can talk about it with some nuance, with some sophistication. And so it doesn't it's not all good, all bad. It just, right. We can, sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're telling yourself, I'm a mess, when that's the narrative, right? What does that story feel? What emotion does that create for you? That story.
Right. I mean, it doesn't feel good. I could say that for
Yeah.
sure. It's probably more like shameful, like I don't know. I'd have to think about it a little bit. Like I mean, it's not a good feeling, obviously. Like, oh, I'm a mess. It's like, yeah. I think comparison is like a big one then too. Like then you're like, well, it seems like everyone else can like get it together. Why can't I? Type thing, which I
Right.
know is
Right. So
not true.
it creates a kind of insecurity, right? So the
Yeah.
feeling, maybe some kind of insecurity. And then when you're feeling insecure, what is that emotion? What's the action tendency of that emotion? What does that emotion create? What are the actions that come out of that emotion? When you're feeling insecure, what do you
Oh,
do?
for sure. Like avoidance is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Like you
Mm-hmm.
were saying, kind of like diverging different ways. Like for sure, avoidance or like checking out. Or I'll get like the paralysis by analysis type thing where it's like, then, okay, well, I'm so overwhelmed. I can just like do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I, and yeah, it just seems like too much to handle type thing. So,
And when
um,
you're feeling insecure, does the action that comes out of that emotion ever something around like maybe compulsively saying yes to things or taking things on because you want to prove that you're not?
yeah, for sure. For sure. I'll like even just recently, I've been telling my husband how overwhelmed and depleted I've been. Just with both my girls are still nursing. I just ran a half marathon and like
Wow.
I'm like, I am done. Like I need to rest. Like
Mhm.
I have tapped myself out. And then the next weekend, I was like, everyone come over to paint pumpkins and I'm going to host and whatever. And
Yes.
then this week, I'm like, we're going to decorate cookies. I'm going to bake them all and bake all this frosting from scratch and like do it all. And I'm like, I'm just going to go do something else instead of like focus on really nourishing and replenishing myself and like getting my house back in order. I'm just going to go do other things.
Right. But I would imagine on some level, right, it comes from like there is a seed of it that comes in from this belief system of like, I've got something to prove, right? Because I'm a mess and you feel insecure about it. And then the actions that
Mm-hmm.
you take is like, it either gets, the actions are paralysis, avoidance, and probably some degree of taking on more and more and more because you feel like there's something you've got to prove to the world, to other people, your
Right.
sisters. You got to prove to your sisters that you're not a mess, right? And
Right.
then, of course, like what's the result all that action creates? What's the real life result it creates?
For me, it's burnout for
Burnout and
sure.
probably a little bit more messiness.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm like, how come, I still haven't washed my windows? There's handprints everywhere and I just can't seem to
Exactly.
get it done, but then I just keep doing other things.
Exactly. Exactly. So, the thing about our mind is that we have all these beliefs about who we are, none of which are actually factual. They're patterns that we've either been told this and then we've leaned into it, or and for the most part it's things that like this was the narrative about who you were as a kid. By the way, so was I, because I was like ADHD and I'm like raising my hand over here for whatever that was that you like. That's exactly how I was described too. People are surprised by that, but 100%.
Yeah. Hmm.
Definitely. um and you're told, you internalize these belief systems, and then because you've internalized them, you're then living them out. And then what happens, because of the way that our mind works, is then we act out of them and we create that result again and again and again. Like we're creating the result of more mess. We're creating the result of, so you're on that hamster wheel. None of that is going to stop until you actually examine this belief system. I'm a mess creates more messiness for you. And when you really see it, like there's nothing this belief system offers me. It doesn't actually help me clean up my life. It doesn't actually motivate me. It ultimately creates more mess.
Hmm.
because I either shut down, I overanalyze everything and get ruminate in my head, or I take on so much that I then burn out.
Mm-hmm.
And then I feel like a hot mess, right? So it does nothing but create more mess. So the work of adulting is actually the work of taking that belief system and being willing to let it go. And this takes active work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it can start with experimenting, looking at all the areas in your life where you're not a mess. Like, you have a podcast and you organize all of that, and you get your interviewees to show up at a certain time, right? Like, all of that takes an enormous amount of organization and planning. There's
Mm-hmm.
so much more, like, there's so much more not mess in your life than mess, overwhelmingly more.
Mm-hmm.
And the mess is all subjective anyhow, right?
Right.
But so then it becomes, you have to actively do the work of dismantling this belief system, of saying, yes, my windows have handprints on them, and that's because I've chosen not to wash them yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's nothing to do with me being a mess. It has to do with my priorities. It's like there's a whole different story here. And
Mm-hmm.
until we can lay that other story down, and you can't just erase it from your mind. I wish we could do like a Men in Black mind erase and just
Right.
strike these from the record.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't. But the more that we deliberately say, like, no, I'm not doing that today. We're not going down this road of this whole narrative. I'm going to tell myself the facts that we're actually going to stay in reality, which is, no, I haven't washed the windows because it's not my priority today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I need to rest because I'm breastfeeding 2 kiddos, and also I've just ran a half marathon.
Mm-hmm.
We get to, and then we get to stay. So, but you've got to actively, and intentionally create that new neural path so that the old neural path prunes. And the old neural path will be there. Like, it'll grow over, but the still, like, it's like a path in a pasture. It'll grow over if it's not used, but you can still see the faint trail of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll become such a little, like, it's instead of it being like a monster that you're wrestling with, it's like a Monsters Inc. It's like this
Yeah.
cute little thing. You're like, oh, you're sweet. I know you. Sometimes it wants to be like, ah, I'm really
Mm-hmm.
scary. And you're like, no, you're not. No, you're not. I'm not afraid of you
Mm-hmm.
anymore.
Yeah.
Right. But this is really what the work of adulting and developmental change in adulthood is. And I think the biggest mistake that people make is we want to pathologize all of this, like it's some terrible thing and we shouldn't have to do this and something's wrong with us, when it's just not true. This is very normal process of adult development. You're in a very normal process of adult development. And just like our kids are growing and developing and evolving their mindset and evolving the way they see and perceive the world, so are you.
Mm-hmm.
No one's cooked at 25.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
right, we're supposed to be evolving and growing and pruning and, letting those old belief systems kind of lay fallow. Like, we're supposed to be, this is part of the growth that we're supposed to be doing in adulthood, and we're not engaging in it. That's when we're really stuck.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. It is crazy how motherhood does, I feel like, bring a lot of these things to light. And it was a belief that I had for a long time, but it wasn't until I was like running my own home that I'm like, oh, like I actually believe this about myself, and it's inhibiting how I'm living my life. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely something I have to work on, and taking some of those things that you're talking about, like, and actually like, okay, what am I doing here? Like, how does this feel? And I love how you use the word yet, like, because I've chosen not to wash the windows yet,
Mm,
because I will eventually.
sure.
But like, just everything how you're reframing it is so good. And I feel like a lot of the listeners can relate to just like, whether it's like this belief or something else, like how that can just kind of contribute to the parental burnout that we
Huge.
experience. And it feels like so much comes up for us, and there's so much maybe just not only our own stuff that's coming out that we need to work through just to be better versions of ourselves, or just to heal and to parent differently or better than maybe that we want to, or that, than we've been shown, like we want to make changes in our lives. Um, but just the day to day, you're talking to somebody whose kids like running around behind them, creating chaos. And, between both my kids, I do not know what's going on in my house right now. Like there's something I need to like, my husband and I are like, what is happening between both my kids? We were up like 6 times last night.
Oh no,
So
I'm so sorry.
it's okay. It's been like a week of just sleep hell at our
Yeah,
house.
it's so hard.
And so I'm tired, right? Like
Yeah,
that contributes to it too. I'm
of
like,
course.
at the end of the day, I'm like, I can fold that basket of laundry, or I can just sit here and take a deep breath, because I feel like I constantly always have to be doing something. Because if I'm not, then it gets on top of me. Right. And so then
Right.
there's
But I
this
think
burnout
it's like,
aspect.
exactly. And I think it's so important that we actually have these conversations of like, why have we decided that whether we actually fold the clothes in the basket or not determines our worthiness as a human being or as a mother? It's nuts.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like we allow a basket of clothes to shame us in the same way that, the notes from the conference that we don't do anything about are shaming us. Like it's our watches telling us
Hmm.
to get up and move in my case, right? Like Apple Watch, stop shaming me. But it's like the silliest thing in the world. Like we are the authors. We are the authors, not the dang basket of clothes, not someone else's idea of what a perfect mother is or what motherhood should be or what it should look like. You are the author of that. This is precisely what our adulting work is. Our growth and development as an adult is to become more self-authored, is to do the hard work to actually say, you know what? Someone else's standard doesn't apply to me. My standard applies to me. And I, believe it or not, get to make it up.
Hmm.
I get to make up the standard,
Yeah.
you know? And this is so earth shattering. Like this is the Copernican leap developmentally that we're working toward in adulthood, in the same way that children have these just seismic perspective changes between those early years. Like, I mean, throughout childhood, right? Object permanence, right? Like that's mind blowing. They think when you leave the room, you're gone, you don't
Hmm.
exist anymore. And then they realize, wait, someone can leave. And I understand that they still exist in the world, even if I can't see them.
Hmm.
Okay. This is like earth shattering perspective change. The same is true in adulthood when we recognize we've been socialized to believe that we need to do things a certain way. And like, that's how we've oriented our life. Like, am I doing a good job? Do you think I'm a good mother? Am I checking the box that everyone thinks I should be checking? And we are able to take those standards that we're embedded in, and we're able to take those standards, instead of feeling subject to them, we make them object. We're able to see them as an object. Like I can abide by those standards if I want to, but I don't have to. And it means nothing about who I am. I get to make my own rules. It's like, this is the same kind of seismic, quantum leap developmentally as is some of those earlier stages for children in childhood, for
Hmm.
us as adults, right? To go from socialized mindset to a self-authored mindset is, a true quantum leap. Like you're going from living inside the snow globe to being able to hold the snow globe in your hand and looking at it and being like, oh, I see. I don't have to actually live by all these rules, or I can pick which rules I want to live by and I don't have to abide by all of them. Like I am actually the author of the story. Who knew?
Hmm.
Right. It's so exciting. To me, it's such an exciting journey. Um, and I think, one of the things that you said that really struck me, because I've said it so much, and as you were saying it, I was like, oh gosh, this is really one that we need to work on, is I think that we have this idea as mothers that we want to be better, we want to be better than our parents. And we want to do all this work so that we can be better parents. But I even think that the paradigm of better, not like better, worse, like that there's some kind of scale is silly,
Mm-hmm.
because then I'm looking to my kids and their outcomes. Like, am I doing better? Am I more successful than my mom was? And then that's puts so much pressure on my children
Yeah.
to perform for me so that I can feel like a good parent. And I think ultimately, it's such a, like, I want to be a better parent is such an earnest, understandable desire, because I have it too. Like, I think, most parents do. But I really wonder if, instead of talking about like, I want to being a better parent, I wonder, maybe if we talk about it, like, I want to have more fun as a parent. I want to enjoy my kids as a parent.
Yeah.
I want to feel more connected with my kids, as opposed to this sort of winning and losing and, comparing to the previous generation, of course, because when we compare to the previous generation, then we got to find fault with what they did so we can feel good about ourselves. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then that just perpetuates. And then our kids are going to be saying things. I want to do better than my parents, and so on and so forth. And I don't know that better is the goal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that that's the reasonable goal.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. I just wrote that down because that just really like struck with me when you were saying that, because I think that like reframing that to being, I want to have more fun with my kids. I want to be more connected. That's like such a better way to word it versus better. Um, right. Because I do think that there is this desire. It's not that I want to be better than them. It's just I've learned through them, like things that I want to change type thing. And so
Totally.
it's not like, I mean, my parents were good parents. It wasn't like, I know that they loved me. They, like it wasn't, like I was saying before, it's not like anything crazy traumatic happened. And I truly believe they did the best that they could. So it's not even being better than them. It's just applying the things that I've learned into my parenting,
Right.
and which is to be more connected as a parent, which is to have more fun, get down on the floor and play with them, to um, explain things differently, to have open conversations that maybe we weren't allowed to in the home, or
Mm-hmm.
just weren't things that weren't talked about. So like creating room, I want to, those type things, versus like better or worse, because that comparison is a lose-lose for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely get stuck in it, and then I start second guessing everything I'm doing, which is it better to push them? Is it better to let them, quit? Is it better to do more? Is it better to do less? Like, then I start getting all in my head, and I'm me and my type A achievement oriented personality. It's like a toxic combo, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't go well. Makes me, act like a lunatic as a parent. I think that in general, this we've like professionalized the world of parenting. We've kind of professionalized parenting. By the way, do you know this? I think this blew my mind. I think it's just fascinating that the word parenting as a gerund, as a verb, the first time it was in the lexicon was like 1970s.
Mm.
Wasn't used as a word prior to that. But think about this. Imagine going to Barnes and Nobles and finding a husbanding or wifing section. That would seem insane,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm a wife. It's a role I have. It's not my job. It's not a verb. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
wifing. I'm not spending my Saturday wifing. Like,
Right.
oh, got some heavy wifing to do today. Right? Like, that is not at all. No, I have a relationship with my husband.
Mm-hmm.
It's a role. It's a relationship. And it's about nurturing the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That's really right? That's what it's about. But with parenting, the way we talk about it, we're like, oh, some heavy parenting this weekend, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Driving the kids, taking them to whatever their sports activities are. And, a kid has a meltdown. You have to be sensitively address the all that. And we're like, oh, some serious parenting. But I mean, I find it amusing, but I also think that it's also put in our minds this idea that somehow we can perfect it.
Mm-hmm.
We can be the best at it. And if we're the best and if we're better at it than anyone else, then our kids are going to be awesome
Mm-hmm.
and we'll produce the best product.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And this to me is so dangerous.
Yeah.
So dangerous. And so it's so seductive. So seductive because, you know, what do we want as parents? Do we want to mitigate tough outcomes for our kids? Yes. Yes, we do. But I think that this is like, you know, it's kind of like dangling out there. This is like false idol in some way. It's like a false carrot. Like if I just say the right thing and I use the right best practices script and I address their need in the way that the, you know, parenting book suggests that I should do it, I'm not going to have to deal with all of those scary, awful things that might happen to my kid. I'll produce a better product.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not how it works. Like we don't think
Right.
about our relationships with our friends or the people we love in that way. We're not like, you know, if I do some heavy wifing this weekend, I'm going to produce a better husband
Yeah.
or I'm going to, right? Like it's not in any way how we think about it because it's not what a relationship is.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And it goes back to what you're saying. It's just kind of like a dangerous game because then basically your validation is coming through your children's actions. Like if they turn out to be a great kid, it's like, I did such an amazing job. But when, you know, something happens, it's like, I messed up, you know, and you can't put that's a
Right.
lot to put on a child.
Yes, it is. And it makes it really hard for us to show up in a clean way with our kids, you know, because we're in our own head
Mm-hmm.
about things. So, you know, I just have so much empathy. I think parenting in this day and age is challenging. You know, I think that there is so much wonderful information out there. I think that it almost sometimes it can be, you know, in the modern world that we live in now, it's not about what we know. There's just endless information to consume. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Like there's all of it. There's great information. There's, you know, life-changing information. There's also inaccurate, crummy information out there too. I mean, there's just endless amounts of it. It's not about learning more and putting, you know, information, putting more content into the form
Mm-hmm.
of our mind. The work that I think everyone in like this modern age that we are living in, the work really is about transformation. It's transforming, you know, changing the form of our mind, changing our perspective, being able to manage the information that's coming in, being discerning, being able to choose what is useful and what isn't. You know, that is far more important now than anything else. So the more that you are developing your meaning making system, the more you are evolving and making your meaning making system more sophisticated, which is really what the work of adult development is, which by the way, is really what the work of self-help is, although nobody says this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the term that you used earlier is so powerful though, like self-author.
Mhm.
I don't remember if it was somebody I was talking to on here or somewhere else recently, about like, do you do something because like you want to, or is it because like this is what you think other people should, you think this is what you should do because other people have told you or said or whatever. And I'm like, I realize that I do that a lot. I'm like doing it on other people's expectations versus my own. And self-authoring is just such a powerful term of I am the author of my life. Why am I giving all these other people pens? You know?
Totally. Zadie Smith, the brilliant writer, wrote, you know, like I am the author of the dictionary that defines me. And if there is one task that I think is required of adults and people either step up to the plate or they don't. Not everyone is willing to engage in this work. But I think that the task before us that's offered to us in adulthood is this work of writing that dictionary, of writing that your own rule book, of self-authoring your own experience of life. And it is not easy to do. It takes a lot of courage.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Before we wrap up, so you have, I'd love for you to tell everybody like where they can connect with you, follow
Yeah.
you, find you, and I'll include all of that in the show notes. But also I'd love for you to tell us about your Mind Your Mind.
Yeah. You can find me on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook, but I never really go on it. But I'm really on Instagram. The handle is Dr. Sasha Heinz, so DrSashaheinz on Instagram. My website, drsashaheinz.com, and also mindyourmind.com, which is my, the way to work with me is to join my mental fitness club for women. It's called Mind Your Mind. It is, mental fitness club is a sexy way of saying adult development. Like if you want to engage in this work, it's not about, it's really not, these challenges that we all face. It's not about pathology. It's not something's wrong with you. It's not like you're broken, nothing. It's that this is normal adult challenges, and we need structure and a framework to do this work together to grow and to develop in the same way the kids need a structure. We have a whole scaffolding for kids to go through this process of development. And then we are set loose into adulthood, and we're told to do it on our own with a stack of self-help books by our bedside table. It's bonkers. So, to actually do this work, it's very difficult to do it alone, in part because you really do need objective observers. You need to learn the skills also of how to self-distance from your own belief systems. And, these are very critical psychological skills that most of us never learned to do. But they're teachable, they're learnable, that with practice, you can master them and become much better at being able to recognize a belief system in your mind and being able to look at it objectively and sort of evaluate it. Is this useful? Does this actually make sense? Is this accurate anymore? Right? I'm a hot mess. Like, is it a useful thought? No, objectively, it's not. Right? Is it accurate? No. Right? Is it relevant anymore? No, but we have to do the work of actually, do you have the skills to be able to do that, which is essentially that's called self-distancing, right? That we are able to distance ourselves from our thoughts and feelings and be able to look at them objectively. And this is developmental work. This isn't, some pathology or you somehow are, something's wrong. No, this is just the next stage of growth and development. So Mind Your Mind is really, we have classes, and I coach inside the community. And I teach a ton of classes, self-inquiry classes, skill building classes, and also just master classes where I, teach concepts. And then we have we have adult study hall. You can come and practice this work together with other women, just a community to give you the structure and support to do this work of growth and development, which is ultimately a ton of fun because there is so much freedom and freedom of expression, freedom to be who you are, peace. It's like letting go of all these things that you recognize. Oh, actually, all these things I thought mattered don't really matter. Isn't that nice? Right. So there is so much freedom on the other side of all of this, and more joy and less pressure and stress.
Yeah. That does sound like a lot of fun. I've been telling my husband, I'm like, I need to get back into something because it's been a while and I need a refresher course on myself.
Yeah. I used to have Mind Your Mind used to be a course. But I turned it into sort of mental fitness club because adult development doesn't end. It's not like you do a course and you're all good. You got your stamp and good to go. It's just like, we develop from cradle to grave. So having a community that was at a price point, a more accessible price point, where you could continually engage in the work, and you can have months where you're all in and months where you're just, you're in the stage which you're in, you're like, I'm sleep deprived. It's been a month.
Yeah.
It's been a hard week, and I'm going to listen to a recording when I go and walk walk the dog, because it's not the priority right now, but that it was at that sort of able to be flexible in that way, which is really, I think, how we should be engaging in our own growth and development. So yeah, it's been so much fun developing it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I will include all of the links in the show notes. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on today and for your just your expertise, your passion for this, for helping people, and even coaching me a little bit today. Now I have to go like dive a little deeper into this.
I
I got
think
to write
what
some
you
stuff
really
down.
need is a nap. I would just highly recommend a nap.
Yeah, that would be nice. I know. But yeah, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for all your time, energy, and expertise today.
So good to talk to you, Liz.